She helped an old woman at the airport and had no idea her millionaire son was secretly watching. She helped a stranger's mother at an airport and thought nothing of it. But what Grace Bennett didn't know was that her simple act of kindness would spark a connection with a powerful CEO, Lucas Monroe, that neither of them saw coming. From coffee to continents apart, their love was tested by ambition, distance, and unspoken fears. Just when it seemed like fate had run out of chances, a surprise return changed everything. Will love find a way when timing never seems right? Stay with us for a story that proves sometimes a life-changing journey. Begins with the smallest gesture. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. The Los Angeles International Airport was a blur of motion announcements echoing overhead, suitcases rolling over tile, and hurried passengers brushing past one another like they were chasing time itself. Amid the chaos, Grace Bennett moved with practiced rhythm in her navy blue blazer and polished flats. 12 hours into her shift as a Horizon Skies flight attendant, fatigue had settled into her shoulders, but her attention remained razor sharp. That's when she spotted her. An elderly woman stood near Gate 52, struggling to wheel a silver carry-on. Her soft pink coat wrinkled from travel, her pearl necklace slightly askew. Her hands trembled as she tried to adjust the suitcase's handle. No one stopped. Grace did. "Let me help you with that," she said gently, stepping beside the woman and taking the bag without hesitation. "Oh, thank you, dear," the woman replied, blue eyes lifting in gratitude. "These old hands don't listen like they used to." "I'm Grace," she introduced herself with a warm smile. "You just arrived?" The woman nodded. "Eleanor Monroe. I just flew in from Austin. Waiting for my son to pick me up, but I took a wrong turn after baggage claim. It's easy to get lost in here." Grace didn't hesitate. "There's a lounge just a few gates down, quiet with real chairs instead of those plastic ones. I can walk you there if you'd like." "That would be wonderful, sweetheart. My son insists I wait in the lounge." But the signs, they start blurring together after a while. Grace matched her pace to Eleanor's slower steps as they made their way down the concourse. She didn't notice the tall man standing near a coffee kiosk navy suit, crisp phone lowered in his hand as he observed the scene in silence. His blue eyes followed every movement. At the lounge, Grace flashed her airline badge at the receptionist and helped Eleanor settle into a soft, high-backed chair. "This is a blessing." Eleanor sighed. "You're the first person today who actually looked at me." Grace crouched slightly to adjust Eleanor's bag beside the chair. People forget how much kindness matters. Airports are full of rush, not pause. My son says the same. Always telling me how the world's moving too fast to notice the good. He sounds wise. Grace smiled. He is. But don't get me started. I'll end up bragging like a true mother. Eleanor chuckled. Grace stood brushing imaginary lint from her blazer. "Well, it was my pleasure, truly. You take care, Mrs. Monroe. You've made this old woman feel seen," Eleanor said softly. Grace gave her hand a gentle squeeze before heading back into the crowd. She didn't know her airline ID had slipped from her pocket, landing softly on the lounge carpet. The man with the blue eyes saw it happen. Lucas Monroe had arrived early to surprise his mother. What he hadn't expected was to witness a stranger care for her in a way that went beyond duty. He stepped into the lounge, retrieved the ID, and read, "Grace Bennett, flight attendant, Horizon Skies Airlines." Her photo bore the same gentle smile she'd given his mother. "You're early," Eleanor called out, beaming as he approached. "I wanted to surprise you, but someone beat me to it," Lucas replied, pocketing the ID. "How was your flight?" "Lovely. Thanks to that sweet flight attendant," Eleanor said. "She reminded me of your aunt when she was young, gracious and thoughtful. You'd have liked her." Lucas smiled faintly. "I think I already do." That night in his high-rise office overlooking downtown San Francisco, Lucas placed Grace's ID on his desk. His world was built on deals numbers and strategy, but this was something else entirely. He picked up a pen and wrote on his personal stationery, "Thank you for helping my mother. She hasn't stopped talking about you. If you'd allow me, I'd like to express my gratitude over coffee. Lucas Monroe." He sealed it in an envelope with her ID. What began as a forgotten card was about to become the start of something that neither of them saw coming. Because sometimes it only takes one quiet act of kindness to change the course of two lives forever. Don't miss the next chapter of Grace and Lucas's unfolding story. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of this emotional journey. The best is still ahead. Grace Bennett found the envelope in her staff mailbox 2 days later, tucked between flight schedules and a maintenance report. The creamy paper stood out immediately, its elegant texture and handwritten script suggesting something far more personal than her usual correspondence. She turned it over, her name, written in neat, confident cursive. Inside, her lost ID card slid out along with a short note that made her pause. "Thank you for your kindness to my mother at LAX. She hasn't stopped talking about the flight attendant who reminded her the world still has good people. If you'd allow me, I'd love to express my gratitude over coffee. Lucas Monroe." The name didn't register at first. It wasn't until her colleague Mia glanced over her shoulder and let out a soft whistle that things clicked. Lucas Monroe, as in Monroe Developments, he's practically San Francisco royalty. Grace blinked. "You know him. Everyone does, real estate mogul. His company owns half the skyline." "Are you telling me he gave you this?" "I helped his mother at the airport," Grace replied, slowly, reading the note again. "She was lost and needed a hand. That's all." "Well," Mia said, nudging her elbow, "he clearly thinks it was more than that." That night, in her small Venice Beach apartment, Grace sat by the window, rereading the note under the dim light of her reading lamp. The words were polite, not pushy, but sincere. It had been a long time since someone had written to her in pen and paper. Her job revolved around movement, boarding, passes, gate changes, tight layovers. But something about this grounded her. She pulled out her phone and composed a short message. "Mr. Monroe? Thank you for returning my ID. Coffee would be nice. Grace Bennett." The reply came less than 10 minutes later. "Please call me Lucas. How about Cafe Marlowe in Santa Monica? Tomorrow at 2. Grace hesitated only a moment before typing, "See you there." The next afternoon, she arrived 5 minutes early, already expecting the glossy type, the kind of man whose confidence was tailored like his suits. But the man who stood as she entered wore a dark green sweater and jeans. He looked less like a developer of skyscrapers and more like someone who spent his afternoons reading near the ocean. "Grace," he said warmly, offering a hand. "Thank you for coming." "Thanks for finding my ID," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, but not forceful. It would have been a disaster to get through security without it. He smiled, returning, It was the least I could do. My mother is still talking about you." They sat at a small corner table beneath a hanging fern. Outside, the afternoon sun filtered through the cafe's glass walls, warming the wood-paneled room. Lucas stirred his coffee, then looked up. "Truthfully, I saw you before you even approached her." Grace tilted her head. "That sounds dangerously close to stalking." He laughed, a sound that surprised her with its lack of pretense. "I meant I noticed how tired you looked. End of shift, I'm guessing. But you still stopped. Most people wouldn't have." "I didn't think it was anything extraordinary," she said. "Helping someone lost in an airport seems basics." "And yet," he said quietly, "you did it without knowing anyone was watching." Grace wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she took a sip of her tea instead. Their conversation stretched effortlessly, touching on everything from flight routes and favorite cities to his latest building project near the Bay Bridge. "So what made you go into real estate?" she asked, as they moved on to pastries. "My dad was a contractor. Summers were spent hauling wood and learning measurements. I thought I'd be an architect, but turns out I was better at seeing the big picture than the blueprints." "Big picture guy, huh?" Lucas nodded. "And you always wanted to be in the air." Grace smiled. "It started as a way to see the world on a tight budget. But I stayed. Because I realized people are fascinating when they're in transit. There's a kind of rawness when you're between places." Lucas considered her words for a moment. "That's surprisingly profound," she grinned. "Don't let the uniform fool you." As the sun began to dip lower, casting amber shadows across the cafe floor, Lucas glanced at his watch. "I've enjoyed this more than I expected." "Me too," Grace admitted, "though I still think you're making a bit too much out of what happened with your mom." "Maybe," he said, standing with her. "But I'm glad I did. Would you maybe have dinner with me sometime?" Grace paused, searching his face. He didn't seem rehearsed or overly confident. Just a man who'd taken a chance and hoped she might take one too. "I have a red-eye to Seattle tomorrow." "Back Saturday," she said. "Sunday." "Sunday," she nodded. As she walked back to her car, Grace realized something unexpected. She wasn't just looking forward to Sunday. She was curious, and curiosity, she knew, often had a way of leading you exactly where you were meant to go. Sunday evening came softly, draping San Francisco in a golden hue as the wind from the bay carried the scent of salt and distant fog. Grace Bennett stepped onto the rooftop terrace of the Harrison, the city's skyline unfolding behind her. Lucas had chosen a small restaurant that overlooked the water, elegant yet unpretentious, like he was trying to meet her somewhere in between his world and hers. He stood near the railing, hands in his pockets, a faint smile on his lips when he saw her approach. "You made it." "I said I would," Grace replied, brushing wind-swept hair from her face. Dinner was quiet at first, but not in an uncomfortable way. The kind of quiet shared between people who didn't feel the need to fill every moment. The city shimmered around them, while conversation drifted from favorite childhood books to the worst in-flight meals Grace had ever served. After dessert, Lucas suggested they walk. They meandered down the Embarcadero, the city alive with the usual Sunday rhythm, street musicians near the ferry building, couples strolling with dogs, the distant hum of cable cars clattering on their tracks. "I can't believe I've lived here most of my life and never taken this walk," Lucas said. Grace laughed. "That's what happens when you live somewhere beautiful. You forget to look up." He glanced sideways. "I don't want to forget anymore." She stopped walking for a beat. The words hung there, not heavy, not pressing, just real. As the weeks unfolded, their lives began to fold into one another's. Lucas invited Grace to his world fundraising galas, ribbon cuttings, investor luncheons. She walked into rooms filled with designer suits and calculated handshakes, always in her modest dresses, always herself. And people noticed. She doesn't act like she's impressed, one board member whispered to another at a rooftop fundraiser. She doesn't have to, the other replied. That's what makes her magnetic. Lucas beamed every time Grace entered a room. It wasn't pride, it was awe. She was his anchor in a world that had long drifted into performance. But it wasn't all marble floors and champagne flutes. Grace, too, invited Lucas into her orbit. He joined her at small staff gatherings with her flight crew, huddled in booths of old diners on layover nights. She took him to her favorite taco truck in the Mission, where they sat on overturned crates and watched the sunset bleed into the city's edge. I don't think I've ever eaten standing up on a curb before, he joked, wiping salsa from his cuff. Then I'm honored to be your first, she replied, grinning. It was at one of these nights, under dim string lights in a cozy back patio in North Beach, that Lucas reached for her hand and said, I want to introduce you to someone who means the world to me. Grace didn't need to ask who Eleanor. The following Sunday, she arrived at Eleanor Monroe's elegant Victorian home in Pacific Heights. The door swung open before she could knock. Grace, Eleanor said, with open arms and a wide smile. My son finally brings you home. I was beginning to think he made you up. Grace laughed as she stepped inside. The house was warm with history photos on the piano, the faint scent of lavender in the air. Over dinner, Eleanor told stories of Lucas as a boy, how he built the tallest treehouse in the neighborhood, with stubborn hands and a wild imagination. He's always had a good heart, she said, casting a proud glance at her son. Just like his father. After dessert, Eleanor and Grace stood in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, their voices low and easy. I hope he knows what he has, Eleanor said softly. He hasn't let many people in. Grace hesitated. Neither have I. Eleanor nodded, as if she understood more than Grace had said aloud. Later, as Lucas drove Grace home, the city lights reflecting off the windshield, she turned to him and said, Your mother is something else. She thinks the same of you, he said, though she also claims this whole thing was fate. Helping with a suitcase and ending up at your mother's table, Grace mused. That's quite a leap. Maybe not, he said, eyes still on the road. She always says that kind hearts recognize each other. Grace didn't respond immediately, but she reached for his hand and held it, fingers intertwining like they'd always belonged there. They drove on in silence, the kind that only exists between two people growing into something neither of them had expected, but both were beginning to believe in. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, just after Grace had touched down in Seattle. She scrolled past flight manifests and scheduling updates until the subject line caught her eye. Congratulations, Rome International Assignment. Her breath caught. It was the opportunity she had been quietly chasing for years, an elite 6-month posting at Horizon Sky's European headquarters, offering better pay global routes and a base in one of the most storied cities in the world. She reread the email twice, heart thudding in her chest, before dialing Lucas. His voice answered on the second ring, warm as ever. Hey, you just landed? I did, she said, the excitement bubbling in her voice. But I have some news. Big news. He listened without interruption as she read parts of the email aloud. When she finally stopped, the silence on the other end stretched a beat too long. That's incredible, Grace, he said finally. Truly, I'm proud of you. She smiled, but something about the way he said it felt slightly off. It wasn't the words, it was the pause, the small crack of hesitation. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah, of course. It's just Rome. That's far." "I know," she said gently, "but it's only 6 months. I travel all the time. We can make it work." His voice was steady, but she heard the shift, like a faint tremor, in the walls of something they'd been building together. Over the following days, Lucas's messages came less frequently. His voice on calls remained kind, but something distant crept in, like he was trying to preemptively let go, before she even boarded a plane. Grace felt it acutely. They still had dinner, still talked, but he was distracted, buried in meetings, always apologizing for having to cut conversations short. One evening, as they sat across from each other in her apartment sharing takeout, Grace set down her chopsticks. "Lucas talked to me." "You've been pulling away." He glanced up surprised. "I haven't." "Yes, you have," she interrupted gently, "and I need to know why." He hesitated, then exhaled, leaning back. "I guess I'm afraid." "Of what?" she asked. "Of losing this," he admitted. "Of losing you." She reached across the table, took his hand. "You don't have to protect me from distance. You just have to be honest with me." He gave a small, tired smile. "You're braver than I am." The week before her departure, Grace stayed busy with packing and training sessions, but the weight of their unsaid thoughts followed her everywhere. Lucas canceled dinner twice, citing work. The texts dwindled to simple good luck. S and travel safe. S. It wasn't until the night before her flight that she decided to confront it head on. She showed up at his office unannounced, the receptionist waving her through with a knowing smile. The door to Lucas's private office was slightly ajar, and as she approached, she heard his voice. "No, Elliot. I'm not expanding to Rome just because Grace is going." Lucas said, "That's not how we do business." There was a pause, then another voice, probably his partner. "It's not business I'm talking about, man. It's personal. You're letting her walk out of your life." Grace froze in the hallway. "She needs this," Lucas replied. "She's worked so hard I can't ask her to stay." "And have you told her how you feel?" the other man asked. A long silence followed. Then softly, Lucas answered, "No, not yet." Grace stepped back instinctively. Her heart was racing, hands trembling slightly. She had come for clarity, and here it was raw and unrehearsed. She knocked once and pushed open the door. Lucas turned startled. "Grace, I was nearby," she said, her voice quiet. "I heard enough." He looked away, unsure of what to say. "I didn't mean for you to, but I needed to," she interrupted, "because I was beginning to think you didn't care." "I care more than I know how to say," he whispered. "Then try," she said simply. Lucas stepped forward, hesitating before speaking. "I love you, Grace. I've loved you for weeks now, maybe longer, but I didn't want to be the reason you gave up something that matters to you." Tears pricked her eyes, not from pain, but from the simple, aching relief of hearing what had remained unsaid for too long. "You don't get to decide that for me," she said. "You only get to decide whether you want to fight for this with me or not." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll fight, even if it's from another continent." She stepped into his arms. Then the city buzzing below them, the moment stretched between uncertainty and promise. Tomorrow, she would fly to Rome. But tonight, they stood together, knowing that love, real love, doesn't always follow the easiest path. It just needs two people willing to keep walking toward each other no matter the distance. The first few weeks in Rome passed like a whirlwind for Grace Bennett. Between her new training modules, adapting to international time zones, and finding her rhythm in the historic city, she barely had time to breathe, let alone think about what she'd left behind. But she did think about it every night. The view from her small rooftop apartment in Trastevere looked out over terracotta rooftops and church domes. Some evenings, she sat by the window with a glass of red wine and stared out at the glowing city, wondering what Lucas Monroe was doing at that very moment. Sometimes she'd reach for her phone only to stop herself halfway. Other times, she sent a message, a photo of her pasta class, a funny moment from the crew, a street musician playing Sinatra. And Lucas always responded, but the conversations were shorter, now more polite than personal. On her days off, Grace explored Rome's museums and winding streets, but she often felt like a visitor in her own joy. The moment that should have been a career triumph carried a hollow ring without the person she wanted to share it with. One Sunday morning, her colleague Alessia, a sharp-eyed Milan native, caught her scrolling absently through her photos at a cafe. "You miss someone," Alessia said, simply sipping her espresso. Grace didn't bother to deny it. "We left things in an in-between place." "In between is worse than an ending," Alessia replied. "At least endings are clearer." Back in San Francisco, Lucas was restless. He threw himself into work, adding more projects, more meetings, more anything that might distract from the ache of absence. Yet it lingered. In the quiet moments on the drive home, standing in the elevator, looking out over the city from his penthouse, he felt the missing like a low, constant hum. He and Grace still texted, still exchanged updates, but the easy flow, the late-night phone calls, the voice memos that used to make him laugh, those had faded, and he didn't know how to get them back. "You're a fool if you think texting her twice a week is going to keep her in your life," his business partner Elliot told him one afternoon over lunch. "I don't want to crowd her," Lucas said. "She needs space." Elliot shook his head. "She needs honesty. Space is a wall you're building because you're scared. She might not need you." Lucas said nothing, but he knew Elliot was right. Then one afternoon, a package arrived at Grace's flat. It was a thin, leather-bound notebook, the kind she used to keep during long flights. She flipped it open, and inside was a simple note in Lucas's handwriting. "This is where I first wrote your name. Without realizing it meant something. I've been writing ever since. Not letters, not business plans, just moments I didn't want to forget. If you want to know how I've felt every day you've been gone, it's all here." Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages. Some were only a line long. The city's quieter without her laugh. Others spanned paragraphs. "I saw a woman with the same green jacket today and almost called out before I realized it wasn't her. It never is." Tears filled her eyes as she read page after page of vulnerability. None of it dramatic. All of it real. Grace called him that night. "You write well," she said when he answered. Lucas chuckled softly, the sound as familiar as her own heartbeat. "I didn't expect you to read it all at once." "I did," she said, every word. A pause and, "I miss you too, Lucas. I miss us." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. "I've been trying to figure out how to bridge the space between us without asking you to give up what you love." "You don't have to," she replied. "But maybe you can let me in again. Let me feel close, even if I'm not physically near." There was silence on the line, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with a shift, a change. "I'm coming to Rome," Lucas said suddenly. "Next month for a week." Grace smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You don't have to fix anything, Lucas. Just show up." "I think I can do that," he said. The call ended with a promise, not of a solution, not of a timeline, but of presence, of two people who had stopped pretending distance could shrink what had already taken root between them. From her window, Grace watched the city lights flicker on like stars and felt something settle in her chest. Hope, not for easy answers, but for connection. Fragile, real, and finally growing again. The air in Rome was different that day, not because of the changing season, but because Grace Bennett knew he was there. Lucas Monroe had arrived on a red-eye flight from San Francisco and sent her a message just as she finished her morning route. Checked into the hotel. "Taking a quick nap. Let me know when you're free." Her fingers hovered over her phone longer than necessary. There was anticipation, yes, but also nerves. They hadn't seen each other in months, and now he was in the same city again, without suits, without business meetings, just for her. They met that evening near the Spanish Steps, where the sunset painted the marble in soft gold and orange. Grace spotted him leaning against a lamppost, hands tucked into the pockets of a navy coat. She paused for a second, taking in the sight before walking up. "You look tired," she said gently. "Time zones aren't kind," Lucas replied with a grin. "But this view makes up for it." She wasn't sure if he meant the stairs or her. They walked without a plan, weaving through narrow cobblestone streets where scooters buzzed past and trattorias spilled warm light onto the sidewalk. Eventually, they found themselves seated at a quiet restaurant tucked behind a basilica. Grace had eaten there before on lonely evenings, but tonight the space felt entirely new. Over pasta and wine, conversation flowed more easily than she had dared hope. Lucas talked about his latest development project, but mostly about the changes he had made, how he'd stepped back from some of the chaos, started saying no more, often started sleeping better. Even she told him about her regular routes through Zurich and Madrid, the quirky coworkers, the endless parade of passengers and stories. But somewhere between the second glass of wine and dessert, the conversation shifted. "I never told you what really changed my mind," Lucas said, folding his napkin slowly. "About showing up, about trying again." Grace looked at him, waiting. "It wasn't the notebook," he continued. "It wasn't even your message after you read it. It was this couple I saw at the airport, probably in their 70s. The wife was pushing her husband in a wheelchair, and she kept whispering something every few steps, and he just kept smiling, like they had a whole world between them that no one else could see." Grace was silent, listening. "I remember thinking, they didn't get there by giving up when things got hard. They stayed. They adapted. And I realized I didn't want my love story to be the one I let slip away because I was too afraid to cross the distance." Her heart ached in that strange, beautiful way when something true is said out loud. She reached for his hand across the table, and this time he didn't hesitate. Their fingers laced together like they had in California. Only now, there was no uncertainty in the touch. For the rest of the week, they moved as if Rome was theirs. Grace showed Lucas the parts of the city she had come to love. Morning espresso at the quiet corner cafe, where the owner knew her name. The small bridge over the Tiber, where she liked to watch the sun rise. The vintage bookstore, where the owner tucked handwritten poems into used novels. Lucas met her flight crew one evening for drinks, holding his own in a whirlwind of accents and sarcasm. And through it all, they reclaimed what had never really been lost. On their final evening together, they returned to the rooftop of Grace's apartment, the skyline of Rome glittering in the distance. "I wish you could stay longer," she said, wrapped in his coat, her head resting on his shoulder. "I do too," Lucas replied. "But I don't think this has to be the end of anything." She looked up curious. "I've been exploring expansion to Europe for a while," he said. "Not for you. Not to chase you, but because I see a life here too. One where I can work and live and be with you." Grace's breath caught. "Are you serious?" "I've never been more," he said. "I don't know exactly how it will unfold, but I'm not afraid of the unknown anymore." A long pause passed between them, soft as the wind rustling nearby laundry lines. Then Grace whispered, "I think I've been waiting to hear that." Lucas smiled and leaned in, kissing her like the world had stopped spinning. They didn't promise forever that night. They didn't make grand declarations about fate. But they did decide one thing. The story between them wasn't finished. It was only beginning this time, with both of them willing to stay to adapt and to write it together. The terminal at San Francisco International Airport buzzed with the familiar hum of wheels rolling over polished floors and boarding calls echoing from loudspeakers. Grace Bennett stepped through the gate after a 12-hour flight from Zurich, her body tired, but her spirit steady. Rome had come and gone like a dream. But this felt like arrival. As she walked toward baggage claim, she spotted a familiar figure leaning against a column holding 2 coffees and wearing a slightly wrinkled blazer, Lucas Monroe. His face lit up the moment he saw her, and Grace felt a warmth bloom in her chest. "I figured you'd need caffeine more than flowers," he said, handing her the cup. "You figured right," she replied, taking it with a grateful smile. They didn't speak much as they walked through the airport. They didn't need to. There was a comfort now that hadn't existed before a quiet rhythm they'd built and were learning to trust. Outside, the cool bay breeze swept across the sidewalk. Lucas loaded her bags into the back of his car and opened the passenger door for her. So he said, once they were driving, "I have something to show you. Just a quick stop before home." "Should I be worried?" she teased, sipping her coffee. "Only if you hate good surprises." They drove along the Embarcadero, then veered toward the marina. As they pulled up to a small building nestled beside a community center, Grace leaned forward, puzzled. The glass doors bore a gold-lettered sign, "The Eleanor Monroe Hospitality Hub, a rest stop for travelers in need." Lucas turned to her, watching her eyes widen. "I wanted to build something that reflected who you are," he said. "Not just what you inspired me to become." She stepped out of the car, slowly taking in the space. Inside, there was a modest but beautifully designed lounge with comfortable seating, warm lighting, a children's reading corner, and attendants already helping travelers. On one wall hung a photograph of Eleanor Monroe, surrounded by volunteers. A quote below it, "Sometimes kindness is the only language a traveler understands." "I knew we needed something like this," Lucas continued, "and I wanted your name on it. But my mother insisted otherwise. She said, 'Grace doesn't need her name on a wall. She lives in the way people are treated.'" Grace pressed her lips together, blinking away tears. "There are 5 more in development," Lucas added. "1 in Chicago, one in Denver, and 2 international locations. But this one is the heart of it. The first one, your home city. She turned toward him slowly. You did all this in just a few months? You taught me that. When something matters, you move. You don't wait. Her voice wavered. Lucas, this is extraordinary. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet pouch. There's more. She shook her head with a laugh, half in awe, half in disbelief. Is this when you pull out a ring? He opened the pouch. Not a ring, but a key. To the office, he said, and to the home we're building next. Together. Not just a space, but a life. Grace looked down at the key, then back up at him. I didn't come back for something flashy, she whispered. I know, he replied. That's why I'm not giving you flashy. I'm giving you real. She stepped into his arms, and they stood in silence, surrounded by everything they'd earned, not through grand gestures, but through showing up, again and again. Later that night, back at Lucas's place, they sat on the rooftop balcony, wrapped in a blanket. Below them, the city glowed like it had missed them too. I used to think airports were just places of departure, Grace said softly. Now, I think they're about return. Lucas rested his chin on her head. Or maybe they're where stories begin. You helped someone's mother. That's how we began, she smiled. And now we help thousands. They clinked coffee mugs, the sound small but resonant. Sometimes, love doesn't roar into your life. Sometimes, it walks in quietly, helps with a suitcase, and never really leaves. Grace had returned, not to the life she left, but to one she and Lucas were building, one rooted in empathy, purpose, and quiet, undeniable love. Grace Bennett and Lucas Monroe's story began with a single, unnoticed act of kindness, one that neither of them could have predicted would change the course of their lives. When Grace, a compassionate flight attendant, helped an elderly woman at the airport, she never expected that woman to be the mother of one of San Francisco's most powerful CEOs. And Lucas, a man used to boardrooms and strategic deals, never expected that watching someone help his mother would unravel something long forgotten inside him. Something human, vulnerable, and real. What started as a thank you coffee slowly unfolded into a relationship full of warmth, humor, and the gentle unraveling of 2 very different worlds. Grace showed Lucas the joy in the simple and sincere, while Lucas gave Grace the space to dream beyond her own expectations. But like many modern relationships, theirs was tested by ambition and timing. Grace's 6-month international posting to Rome brought both excitement and uncertainty. And for Lucas, a man who had always relied on logic and control, her departure felt like standing on the edge of something he couldn't define. Distance didn't break them, but silence almost did. Through missed calls, half-spoken fears, and the painful weight of pride, both had to face a hard truth. Love doesn't always collapse in a single dramatic moment. Sometimes it fades because 2 people forget to reach for each other through the fog. But Grace and Lucas found their way back, not through grand apologies or perfect timing, but through courage, honesty, and the willingness to simply show up. Lucas flew across the world not to fix the distance, but to understand it. Grace didn't expect a miracle, only presence. And from that came something extraordinary, a foundation built in both name and spirit, born from one act of compassion, a renewed relationship built not on fantasy, but on the quiet strength of 2 people who had chosen each other again and again. So what can we learn from their journey? That in a world rushing forward, pausing for someone can mean everything. That kindness ripples farther than we imagine. That love isn't only found in grand declarations, but in consistency, presence, and courage to speak the words we're afraid of. Grace and Lucas teach us that timing is never perfect, but effort can be. And most of all, they remind us sometimes the person meant for you doesn't enter your life with fireworks, but with a warm coffee, a helping hand, and a chance to begin again. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment where a simple act of kindness changed everything? Or have you ever lost or found someone because of timing? Share your thoughts in the comments below so others can be inspired by your journey. And if this story moved, helped you reflect, or gave you hope, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support keeps these meaningful stories alive and gives us the motivation to bring you more. Because the world needs more kindness, more connection, and maybe just maybe a few more second chances.